in this. Like I actually went through a progression of learning how to be family and mission, and then doing family or mission before I came to understand what it is to live as a family on mission. And so I want to show you a little bit about this, but one of the things that we say is that the family and mission is like a dualistic life. It's about trying to, in equal parts, live your life as both a family and be about the mission. And so I don't know if incriminating stories come to mind, or if you're living in this tension right now. I'm happy to share one of mine, but before I do that, I want to ask, what's something that comes to mind for you when you think of trying to balance both family and mission? Maybe tell me some anecdote, or how that sounds. It's like how that feels to you.
I think that's the greatest struggle for me, especially being bivocational. I worry when I think about ministry and mission. I'm convinced that I don't want to go ahead and not give my children and my wife what they need as I'm seeking to go ahead and fulfill God's mission. So without question, that's the thing that's on the forefront of my mind the most when I come to the Lord the most. And I think a lot of prayer time has allowed for God to lead me to a place where I have peace, that God will give me the balance, but it's something that's, if it's not in the forefront of my mind, I can easily go ahead and not first fulfill my role as husband and father if I'm not careful and constantly before the Lord. So that's probably my biggest stressor, to be honest with you.
Thanks for sharing that, John. I appreciate that. Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about my story. I started getting excited about this idea of the Great Commission, sharing Jesus with people, and also serving in our local church at the time. And I thought that I had to do a lot of things to really learn and grow as a missionary, even in a local context. And I also had a growing family at the time. My kids are almost all teenagers right now, but this is a number of years ago when I first started learning this. And I thought, with little tiny kids, that what we should do is we should lead the children's church. So we were going to the first service, we were leading the 3 and 4 year olds. Then we were going to second service with our, at that time, 3 young kids. Then we'd come back in the evening and help lead the college gathering as well. So I'd be preaching sometimes, or at least leading small groups and meeting with college kids, also our small group at the time. And my wife was looking at me and saying, "You're out of your mind." And my response to her was like, "Hey, you really got to sacrifice your life for Jesus." Like, not a good answer. I'm just telling you. But this is where I went, not just because of the ramifications, but because of the way I misled my family in that. Because what I was trying to do was say that we have one life, and we have to just like burn it out, man. We got to go as hard as we can, living for like trying to get all the time, the 24 hours. Let's get all the family stuff and all the mission packed into one life. And it doesn't work. That's what I found. It doesn't work. And it causes this dualistic life. You think that you live part of your life is like as a missionary, and part of your life is focused on your family, and you try to balance that. And I personally, I don't believe that balance is what Jesus is seeking for us. I can talk more about that later, but I don't think balance is what we're trying to do, like use our judgment to figure, am I going too far this way or that way? I think he's asking us to do something totally different. But what happened for me was I was like, we got to blow this up because this isn't working. So I need to find balance, right? And that what I did was I thought, let's do family or mission, right? Let's figure out what part of the days on my iCal I can schedule in mission stuff, and what part of the days I can do family things. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I was still trying to balance a dualistic life. And what I found myself doing was I would sacrifice one for the other. Oftentimes the first thing to go for me, sadly, was family, because I thought like, oh, these people need me. My family's comfortable in the sense like there's no crisis in my home. Let me go help these people that are in crisis. This was just part of my growth process, and realizing that I would end up like spending way too much time discipling young college guys or people in our small group at the time. And then I would, or even just being in my neighborhood. And then my kids would get neglected from me and my wife would carry this burden again. And so I would walk through this whole stage of like, I'm repentant of that. But then I would find myself spending a lot more time with my family and saying like, what about the mission? And then being drawn into that. And so I'm teeter-tottering around. I don't know if any of you can relate to it. It's okay if you can't. We can just use me as the example of how not to do this. I'm totally okay with that. But it's an untenable position to be in. And unfortunately, it's what most of us seem to think it looks like to do the work of the kingdom, is to figure out how to be the most efficient, most successful in balancing things. And this family and mission or family or mission, I don't think it's what God's calling us to. And for so many of us, our imagination just stops right at the place of finding where and or ends. We just don't think past that. And so what does it look like to do something totally different? And I'll address that next, but I want to know, does anyone have can anyone else relate to this? Are you feeling this tension? I know we're in a time of COVID where sometimes it's a little harder to think about mission the way we've thought about it, probably up until March of this year, and we're trying to reconfigure that. But have you felt this tension before?
Yeah, I could share on that, Gino. Thank you.
1,000 feet, turn left onto East Main Street.
That's cool. I guess when we were moving up here to West Long Branch area about 7 weeks ago, right before that, I was feeling that pressure. I was feeling that stress of trying to do the balance act. And before that, we really never had that. We were in a different type of state. So when we started to move up to the area we want to really plug into, it was stressful. There was arguments. Family was stressed out, and I really had to stop. I had to take a few days and just stop and really try to get back into that restful place. And finally did. But again, like every day, you have to remember to start off that way instead of try to chase after getting that way with Jesus.
Yeah, no, keep going. I'm just agreeing with you. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to cut you off.
I think I'm done.
Okay. That's great. I need that. We'll just talk all day and everyone else will be like logging off. Bill, that's really helpful. I appreciate that. And one thing that I was thinking as you were saying that was oftentimes, and maybe it gets to helping me explain what I was trying to say, in that our imagination kind of sticks in these like family and mission or family or mission. So even when we get rest, right? If the operating system of our life is still and or, once we get rest, we go right back into that like kind of mill, if you will, that is not necessarily the healthiest thing. I'm not pointing the finger at you. I'm just saying that rest is good, but a new imagination is what you and I and all of us kind of need to find if we're going to find health. That's what I'm getting at here. And I think that was really helpful to me. Anyone else want to share? All right, let's dig into family on mission. So what family on mission structurally is learning to see your family as part of and an expression of the mission of God. And so when I don't have a ton of time to break down these words, I'd love to talk more about family, and I'd love to talk more about mission. I was recently reading some things that I think are really interesting as I'm studying Acts for our class, but also we're going to preach through portions of Acts next year. And one scholar talks about the book of Acts not being about just mission, but about witness. And I think that's really interesting thing to think about, that their position on it was mission is so much about outcomes, and witness is about boldly proclaiming and living in a certain way that represents you're a citizen of the kingdom. And so when I'm talking about mission, I'm thinking more about witness, actually, is what I learned this last week, and thought, that'd be helpful for this talk, but we don't have time for that, more than what I just said. But here's one thing I want to emphasize. When I say family, most of us probably think of like the family unit in the house, and we are including that in this. But when I think of family, I'm thinking about the church. And so the family of God is made up of single people and divorced people and widows and widowers and married people and college students and all sorts of different people in different stages of life. So when I ask this question, what does it look like to learn to see my family, the church, as not only part of, but an expression of the mission of God? It changes things. It means that how you're relating in the scheduling of your life to your family and home is part of the mission of God. It's not, I'm doing mission and then I do my family responsibilities. So what we're saying is that everything is part of this mission, including all of your family in it. Now, I don't mean that the entire church participates in your missional community. That's weird. That would, if you have a house that can fit your entire church, you either have a very small church or you have a really big house, and either one's like, good on you. That's awesome. What I'm saying is, how do we look and live as, well, I just said this, but how do we look at people that are single? How do they become part of the family on mission? What does it look like as a single person to be part of a family on mission? Not balancing family or mission, or trying to do family and then do the family thing and then do the mission thing. It's about being integrated in your life as family on mission. Or your marriage, how is that an expression or expressed through the mission of God? What about children? Like, how do we think about every single thing that we have in our lives, and every relationship within our missional community is part of the mission of God, is given for the glory of Jesus and how we operate and live together? Well, what that can do, saying something like that, can probably make you feel either like, oh my gosh, I got to figure out how everything I do glorifies God. And that sounds really weighty. And it could do that. And maybe that needs to happen for you. But maybe that's not what needs to happen. Maybe what needs to happen is you need to see the ordinariness of the glory of God in all things. Like, God delights in the simplistic things of your life. It's not about striving and trying to earn this thing that you achieve so that God is now glorified. It's saying God is present and at work in everything that is going on in your life. And as you recognize that, you see, wow, all of this is part of the mission. This is important. And so when we talk about missional communities and having these smaller gatherings in homes, I mean, I'm thinking way back in last year when we were allowed to do that, but when that happens again, there's always this point of tension for people about hospitality, having people in the home. Some people are really comfortable with that. Some people aren't. And I just say that if everything is given to us as part of this expression of being the family of God in the mission of God, then our homes aren't probably our havens, but they might be part of our mission project. And how we relate to them may or may not need to change, but it's something that comes out of this thinking that everything is for that purpose. I do think that that's something that we could wrestle with and think through. And so before I show you some of the structural things that make up a healthy family on mission, I'm wondering if you guys have any reflections, comments, questions. You can save the critiques to later and you can send them to Matt. That would be fine. I wish I could see the chat. It's probably telling me to correct something I said or something, but I can't see it. I'll share my slides.
I just think some of the stuff that you're saying too, I think, I was a single guy for a while in ministry. And so I think in your mind, you sometimes have almost like this vision that people have preconceived notions of you. And it's so easy to put yourself outside of the mix because everybody else has, husbands, wives, and children, and you don't, and I think one of the great challenges is to be able to just incorporate everybody where, like what you said too, there's in churches, we got widows and widowers who they don't know what church looks like after they lose their spouse, right? Because they did everything with them and now they don't. And everything in life looks different now. So how can we go about making people just say, listen, there's preconceived inhibitions that you have, other people have, let's break it down. Like you don't have preconceived, like I never had preconceived inhibitions with my brothers or sisters, irregardless before I was married or after I was married, before I was kid or after I had kids, right? And to get that at a point in time where we can do that and say, no, listen, so this is a whole family dynamic. We figure these things out, but break down the preconceived notion that you have. I just think that's really good because I think a lot of people put themselves left behind when you're looking at ministry going forward. And then other people, they may love others, but they're just not sure how to incorporate people that aren't in their stratosphere, if that kind of makes sense. So just to be intentional about all these things and don't pretend that people don't feel a certain way. Like deal with it, talk to them and tell them, I know you're feeling a certain way, but if you were married for 40 years or single your entire life, it doesn't matter. This is family, and to break it down that way. So well said,
Thanks, Sean. That's helpful. There's other ways besides just the relational things that I mentioned about singleness or married or any of those. There's other ways that we compartmentalize our lives. Our hobbies, the things that we like to do, or things that we, whether it's a sport or the things that we do with our kids or how we do things in relationship to other people. I know people that do like the rock climbing gyms or they run marathons or all of these things that we say, okay, well, that part of my life is for, I spend this much time doing that. And then I come over and do something else. And we're saying, how do you integrate everything as part of the mission of God? How do you start to see everything? So there's a tool that we use that we've acquired and been given that tells us about, it's another triangle. You guys are going to love triangles and you're going to know how to draw them after launch really, really well. That just talks about, there are 3 aspects to a healthy family on mission. And we use these terms: spiritual parents, predictable patterns, and missional purpose. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one, and then we'll have some time for maybe some questions to Rob and Omar and Matt and myself if you have any questions, and we can just give you our responses because we don't know if we have the answers, but we definitely will have something to say in response to what you ask. But let's talk about spiritual parents. Spiritual parents are the people who take responsibility to lead the family. And when I say family, I'm thinking in the context of missional community. Spiritual parents are the people that take responsibility to lead the family by lovingly laying down their lives to serve the family. So the leaders are the servants, and the leaders are like parents in the spiritual way, not necessarily sending people on timeouts and all of that kind of parenting stuff, but more in the sense of like, we're people that are willing, because of the experiences that the Spirit of God has led us through, we're willing to give of ourselves for the sake of the good of the kingdom and as it's expressed in this missional community, in this family. Spiritual parents are people that, there's a word that's the word kenosis. It's meant like self-emptying is how it's mostly defined. I think there's another way to see it though. It's like the flip side of self-emptying is others filling. I like that thought, that your others fillingness. It's a cruciform way of living, following in the way of Jesus. And we don't do that perfectly, but we recognize that this is kind of an aspect of this. I'm not saying this to say the call is really hard, you better gird up your loins. That might be true, but what I'm saying is, do you know what you're doing when you say that you're going to lead a missional community? That there needs to be some sense of, I'm not doing this for acclaim and praise. I'm doing this to care for others as I've been cared for, and be cared for others in a way that's appropriate for them to learn to care for me. So my question for you is, are you called to be a spiritual parent? Is that something that, and this is a rhetorical one. You don't have to give me the answer on this one. I want you to think about this. Maybe spend some time in your breakout sessions or in coaching, because I'm not trying to challenge you and say, are you sure you're called to be a spiritual parent? That's not the tone of this question. The tone is, are you considering what is asked of you to lead a healthy family? And so a spiritual parent knows to, or learns to, use the opportunities of ordinary life to share good news with people. Spiritual parent doesn't necessarily need a 10 a.m. on Thursday coffee appointment to preach the gospel to someone. The spiritual parent knows that as the diapers are dirty and the kids are screaming about dinner being late, that there's an opportunity there to share some good news with some of those kids. That's a metaphor, though. If that's your missional community gathering, man, more power to you. That's awesome. I've been there and I'm back there again with friends. So it's awesome to have all of that chaos. It's a beautiful thing. But the spiritual parents model what it looks like and demonstrates by their lives as best as they can what it looks like to live out of their identity of being beloved children of God. And so I want to take just a second to mention that, because the last time I shared this training, I didn't say this, and I really think this is important. This is not about you being perfect, not at all. In fact, I think that in business, the leaders are the ones that are seen as the ones who make the best decisions, and that's how they kind of move up to leadership. But in the church, we don't get things done. We replicate who we are. That's what we do. So God does a work through us, but he's also doing a work in us. So when you're modeling and demonstrating, I personally, and I tell everyone that's in leadership development or leading other communities in our local church, I say that more important than you getting things done right, doing the right things, is that you do them rightly, in the sense of, I would much rather have repentance be modeled by the leaders than denial and good execution of that denial. So I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, but I think that's important. So when I'm asking the question, are you called to be a spiritual parent? I'm asking, are you prepared to go first in admitting the reality of what you believe and where you are when there's difficult things, like confessing and repenting? Cool. Let's turn to something that's, less convicting. All right, let's talk about predictable patterns. Predictable patterns means that healthy families have predictable patterns in order to thrive. Imagine yourself as a 12-year-old in my home, whether you're a girl or a boy, or a 12-year-old, maybe a friend of one of my kids that comes over, and you're sitting there, you're like doing the homework and playing some video games, and then it's getting close to 6 o'clock maybe, which is the normal time that you eat dinner at your home. And my kids like turn to you and say, like, we have no idea if we're going to eat tonight. And it's not because we don't have the means to do that, because I know that's a reality for people. It's because there's no reliable understanding or example of when we're going to eat. It's just, go ahead and eat whenever you want. The 6 of us eat at different times. There's no pattern. Sometimes we eat at 10 o'clock. Sometimes we eat at 1. It causes a lack of trust for the kids. They start wondering, like, are we going to eat? Is it time? Can I just go do this? Predictable patterns build healthy families by having things that they can rely on. When you look at the life of Jesus, he had some patterns to his life, it seems, from reading the Gospels, that he was eating meals, or the Gospel of Luke seems like he's going to or at or coming from a meal the entire way to Jerusalem. That seems like what he's doing all the time. But he's eating meals, he's teaching, he's retreating and getting alone with God, he's healing people, and he's walking along the way. There's a life that, even sometimes I wonder if we just told you a story about what someone did in the course of a day, and you could, just by those identifications, you could say, is that Jesus? Just by what he did. There was a predictability to the way we understand. And these patterns, these predictable patterns form a family in at least two ways. They provide two things for a family. One is stability, and the other is security. So the expectation of having that meal at the same time or something similar, where the kids say like, hey, are we having dinner tonight because a time has passed? That's formed and shaped by the predictable patterns that our family has developed. So we're a family that for a very long time, that was kind of the one thing that we tried to do, was have dinner together. If I had to work late, we'd hold dinner. We'd have little kids wait until late at night to have dinner together, because we wanted, that was a pattern for us. And I'm not saying that's the best way or the way that everyone has to do it. It was just a pattern that we decided to have as a family. We're going to say, you're going to have a meal here, whether you bring friends or not, that's fine. More people might be at our table. But that's going to provide the stability that you can rely on that happening in a way. And also security, because out of the consistency of something, you start to form some stability, not just something that you can rely on, but you start to believe that this is going to be there for you and you can count on this. And security starts to develop into maturity for people, because then they can say like, I have relied on these patterns. They've formed and shaped me into someone that trusts, and now I can do the same thing. And so I'm using that example of our home, but let's use the example of a missional community. Does your missional community have predictable patterns that are providing stability? People know what to expect when they participate as a missional community. And I'm not just talking about a weekly meeting. I'm talking about the ethos of your community. Is there stability about the spirit of the community? And does that stability provide security for people to know that they have a group of people that they can rely on as family? Those predictable patterns bring that about. The last point on our triangle is missional purpose. Healthy families have a sense of purpose that's greater than themselves. The purpose of these families isn't just to be family. That's why the purpose of a missional community isn't just to gather with any regularity. That's an example of a predictable pattern of a missional community. I hope you're following with me, but it doesn't mean that's the goal, the end result. Like, having a weekly gathering is important for developing predictable patterns and for growing and shaping and forming us in the character and likeness of Jesus. But it's not the telos, the end goal of a missional community. The goal isn't just to be family. Like, I don't know that even in our own like sub families within our own homes, that our goal is just to be family. So that might be a really good goal with a lot of the breaking up of families. But I think our goal is that beyond just being family, is that for our family, it's that we would raise mature believers, followers of Jesus, that would go and replicate these predictable patterns and be spiritual parents themselves with a purpose to do the same for others as a missional purpose. So when I say missional purpose, I'm thinking about, do you have a committed focus of some kind as what is your purpose as a community? What is your missional community's purpose? And oftentimes we have a purpose because of our exuberance, our enthusiasm. We create purposes that are really big and almost to be unexplainable. Like, we are going to reach everyone in our city with the good news of Jesus. It's awesome. How do you know if you've done that? Like, we'll check back with you in about 20 to 40,000 years. No, just kidding. About 20 years, right? And see what kind of dent. That's awesome. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't have that. I'm saying, like, remember what I said earlier about God being present and work in the ordinary? What if your missional purpose was to disciple the people that you already know or that you're getting to know in your neighborhood, your apartment complex, on your block, or in your place of work, and you were to help each other do that? You had a missional purpose to build relationships with a certain segment of that entire city. Rather than aim so high that you can't actually measure it, you might actually focus on a purpose that's smaller. And so one of the ways that we've found a missional purpose fulfilled, like having a purpose of reaching people in our neighborhoods, has been simply by demonstrating hospitality. And that's why for us, the pandemic has been pretty disorienting, because you can't have people over and you have to figure that out a little differently, and we've adapted and adjusted. But by having a purpose of making others welcome in whatever way, whether it's in your home or outside at a coffee shop or over a phone call or something, you're saying something really important to that person. You're saying that you matter to me, and you're opening up the possibility for them that if they matter to you, maybe they matter to God too. We're demonstrating what God looks like by being present with people. And so the missional purpose could just be identifying who those people are. It doesn't have to be this grandiose idea. I want to end, before we answer some questions, if you have them, I want to end with this. I just want to say this. If you're going to live as a family on mission, be prepared to put to death some things in your life. Because part of the mission is forming this family, this missional community, bringing people that have different expectations, that have different preferences, even maybe different backgrounds and understandings together, and not just getting things done for other people, but being formed and shaped into a family, the family of God that lives in the mission of God. And so I want to encourage you. I don't say that as like the challenge. I want to tell you that the simple work of learning each other's stories isn't simple. It takes time. And the work of learning how to relate to each other in conflict, it takes time, but it's worth doing those things really well, because Jesus is present and at work in them. And that's how he wants you to be a demonstration of who he is for others. John 13:34 and 35 says that the way that you love one another demonstrates that you're my disciples. So in a sense, an apologetic, a witness of the gospel is how we as a family on mission love others. And I think that's really important for us to end like there and just think about, it's a high calling. It's a really exciting and fun and challenging and sometimes very messy experience to do this. I'm sure you all have experienced that in some way, but it's really worth it when you put these things together and start saying it's how we live that demonstrates who Jesus is, not just what we do. I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on Family on Mission that we could answer? One thing I was thinking of, Gino, as you were talking through it in the chat, was predictable patterns. Like this pandemic has kind of thrown off all of our predictable patterns, both as churches and as families. And I think we've all learned to adapt and adjust, and it seems like it's ever changing. But I think as you lead your church, your missional community, it's important that you remember that, like as you lead your folks, that all their predictable patterns have been upended. And so we as a church, I think it's important that we create those safe, predictable patterns that they can rely upon, whatever these might be, whether it's an online Zoom or, it's a weekly prayer on Facebook or even your worship services, that you create these new predictable patterns, for church planners and those that think about starting new things. This is an exciting time because we can start all new things and be creative. And so I just encourage you with that people are wanting that right now, the predictable patterns. I think that's a huge missional opportunity for you to reach your communities, I think, right now.
Hey, Gino, I was just kind of wondering if you're starting a new missional community, how do you, from the beginning, develop that culture of being family on mission?
It's a great question. It's it's, well, you're gonna walk through that a lot in the coaching. But I think so the first place to start is with this kind of framework of understanding, of saying like, where are we headed? What are we aiming for? And so how you fill that out is different in every context. Like we do a lot of work with that and have some training with launch that we're going to give you as we talk about what that looks like. I mean, I think that working through the Kairos circle is super important for developing a language of how we hear and respond to God, hear from and respond to God, and speak about that in community. So, because what that does is, instead of, like, if you were talking about a situation where there might be some conflict as we're new together, the Kairos can say, like, maybe your Kairos is that you disagree with the missional purpose that we're talking about as a community. That's a Kairos. That's not doesn't have to be an argument. It's like, why is that so important to you? What's going on? And walking people through that. So the tools that we've given you are helping you to develop the skills to relate to people in a way that will help to form this end goal that we're pointing towards. It just takes a lot of slow work.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you for that.
I miss your beard, man.
Me too.
I think if I can add something, I think there's three sides to the triangle. You have your spiritual parents, predictable patterns, missional purpose. Some churches just don't have a missional purpose. And so for some of you, you're doing launch because you need to identify your missional purpose. But every church has the first two, spiritual parents and predictable patterns. The problem is, oftentimes people don't recognize that they are in a position of being spiritual parents, or they abuse the privilege of being a spiritual parent. The other side is that every church has predictable patterns. Every small group, every missional community has predictable patterns. The problem is, some of those predictable patterns are unhealthy. And this is a time to reframe what are the healthy, predictable patterns you want. Just like a family. Families have parents, whether a single parent or two parents. And every family has predictable patterns, whether healthy or unhealthy. And really what we want to help you do is help you understand the significant spiritual parenting role that your leaders have. And for some of you to begin to reframe healthy, predictable patterns. Because a lot of people see unhealthy, predictable patterns, and it's your role to help them reestablish healthy, predictable patterns.
Yeah, I have a question for Gino. You started off by talking about the mission and family, or mission or family, and then kind of just talking about the difficulty of that dichotomy. But then when you talked about mission on family, that you redefined family, well, it includes the core, but it also has a greater family, the body of Christ. And that it's a part of a mission and it's expression of mission. But just in terms of like maybe the nitty gritty, the details, right? How does that work? Of course, there's a perspective change. Correct me if I'm wrong. The way you see your own core family, the way you see those in your body of Christ, you see them as your mission field in a sense. But I mean, just at the end of the day, you're still going to wrestle with the core needs that your nuclear family has.
Sure.
So how do you just work through, like, just not seeing it as a dichotomy, but at the end of the day, when you are creating a schedule, when you are creating time, you still have to schedule that out. You still have to do that, even if your perspective is different. So could maybe you just walk through a little bit of that?
Sure, that's a great question. I think if I'm understanding you correctly, and I think I am, so feel free to jump in. I think when I'm talking about, you might have to die to some things. You might have to die to some of the individualistic ethic, maybe all of it, that we're so popular in our country. And one of the ways that might express is, how about I just tell you a story about me, my family. I have a daughter who just turned 16. She's our second oldest. And from the time she was really young, she wanted to dance. and she just wanted to be a dancer. That's what she wanted to do. We said, like, dance is got to fit into a couple of things for our family, because there's 4 kids and she's the second oldest, right? It has to fit into kind of our life as a family on mission, and our budget as a family on mission. You know, two important factors, but we're not willing to sacrifice either of those for the sake of any individual thing. Now, not every family has to agree. I'm not saying that this is the thing. This is just how Jill and I kind of worked through this. And so there were a lot of years when there was a really sad little girl that was saying, like, I can't go to class because we couldn't afford it, or because it just wasn't part of what our focus was. But we were teaching and forming her into saying, dance is really important to you, and we'll work our tails off to make that happen, but we can't break up the thing that God's doing at this time. So it took a number of years, but then she got into a class because it worked in our budget, and we were meeting people through the dance class, and it was like part of our mission. And we said, so we're still making that part of our schedule, right? Now we're saying this is all together. And now that girl, I mean, goodness, she's like in a bunch of dance classes. They're all online, and she went into like advanced classes because she works hard every day on herself. She's doing ballet, and she went like, anyway, I could brag about her. It's amazing what she's able to do, because she learned commitment and drive and dedication. And we weren't trying to deprive her. We were trying to shape her and say, the most important thing is that we learn how to love God and others and do that together. So how do we incorporate the life of our family into the mission of God, rather than try to balance doing both? And that requires sometimes some difficult conversations. That's one of like a number of examples. Does that help you?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Any other questions? Did all the group leaders, were you able to download the document that I posted in the chat? Cool. All right, we'll break up into your church group. So what we're doing again this week is all of you will be with just your church, or a combination of churches if you're, you know, part of a group of churches. And so each group leader, you will lead the discussion. But feel free to ask questions. We'll be in the main room available to you if you run into a stumbling block. I'll put my cell phone here in the chat. You could text me if you have any needs or questions, and one of us can jump in and help facilitate that. But as Rob said at the beginning, over the next 2 months, you'll just be getting all of what we've learned the last 3 months fleshed out in coaching. So you'll have, each of the point leaders will have 2 calls probably in December, or between now and Christmas, I would say, and then 2 calls in January to flesh out these last 3 teachings. It's been a lot, and so we want to slow down with you and help you just digest this and really figure out where you're at and what your kind of next steps are with each of these things. We started with covenant and kingdom. Last month was understanding your local context, and then now the family on mission. And so they all, hopefully you can see how they all kind of complement each other. If there's no other questions, I'll break us out into our rooms.
Matt, are we coming back?
I will email you the slides.
Are we coming
All
back
right.
here, Matt?
What?
Are we coming back here?
No, I will close the meeting at 9:15.
Okay.
That gives you 45 minutes. All right.
Yeah. Gino, one quick question, and I apologize before we break out the session. Could you define spiritual parents again? I'm writing some of this down. I got the gist of it, but when you first stated it, I thought it was a very well stated definition.
Dang, I wish I had written it down. That would have been really helpful.
Okay, I thought you did. I thought you were.
No, I'm
reading.
just kidding. I'm just kidding. I think I have something here. Let me look at my notes. I think I said that spiritual parents are people who take responsibility to lead the family by lovingly laying down their lives for the family. Which, as a Sicilian, that sounds really, really different than what I actually mean it to sound like.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Jim.
All right. Enjoy.
Turn off recording, Matt.